Hello, my name is Steve Bowler, and welcome to the Juniper vLabs lab number 4. In this lab, we're going to be taking a look at network address translation, otherwise known as NAT, and specifically, we are going to be looking at Source NAT to interface. So in this video, I'm going to be configuring and explaining the following. We're going to explain just the basics of NAT. We're going to configure Source NAT to interface, and we're going to perform show commands on the firewall to verify proper connectivity and to help troubleshoot issues. You can check out our GitHub link below for step-by-step guide and the initial configurations. So this is going to be in the Bowler CBT Labs GitHub account. We have a link to all of the repositories that we're going to be using for the labs inside the YouTube video. Just click on the description and you will be able to see the README file, the step-by-step guide, and the initial device configurations. So let's look at the network diagram and see what we're going to be doing. We have two hosts in the trust zone, host 1 and host 2, and then we have a host 3 in the untrust zone. So to start the lab, if you're new to Juniper vLabs, you can watch my vLab number 1. I show you how to create an account and how to access the portal. Specifically, we are going to be using the zones policies lab under the security tab. So there is a NAT source and destination. That one is a little complicated. What we want to start out is by explaining one of the most basic forms of network address translation, and that is the Source NAT to interface. So what we're going to be doing in this lab is we're going to be re-IPing the interface between host 3 and the VSRX. We're going to do this so that we provide a simulated public IP, which is going to be in the 200 network range. And then we'll have our private IP range in the trust zone. So the 200 will be on the untrust zone on the VSRX, and we're going to show you what we're going to be using NAT for and how to use Source NAT. So we're going to simulate connections coming from an internal network going to an external destination. And we're going to take that traffic and we're going to NAT it to the external facing interface on the firewall. So a lot of enterprises do this, and this is pretty much a standard throughout many networks, is you're going to take your private IP range and you're going to be NATing it to a public IP address. So this is going to be a simple lab. We're just going to take you through the basics on how to do this, why you would do this, and then do some show commands to verify that we have proper connectivity and that the NAT is working properly. So let's get started. I have already started the lab. I've booted up all the devices so that you don't have to wait. It usually takes about 15 minutes. And so if we go back to the diagram, we're just going to be configuring a new IP address on the link between the VSRX and host 3. So on the VSRX, if I do a show configuration interfaces command, the connection to host 3 is gig E002, so we're going to change that IP from a 10 IP to a 200 IP. So let's go ahead and delete that IP first off of 002. And then we'll be using 200.0.13.1. And we'll just do a /30. And then we'll be using 200.0.13.1. And we'll just do a /30. And then we'll be using 200.0.13.1. And we'll just do a /30. And then we'll be using 200.0.13.1. And we'll just do a /30. And then we'll be using 200.0.13.1. And we'll just do a /30. And then on the host 3 device, we do a show configuration, interface is pipe display set. We're going to delete that IP address off the interface, 002. And we'll go ahead and put our own on there, which is going to be 200.0.13.2. It's going to be a /30. So again, the reason that we're doing this is we are simulating a public IP address that's routable across the internet. This is very common practice. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go on to the VMX host 1 and host 2. What we're going to do is create a static route to the 200 network so that we have reachability. Because by default in these labs, what I'll show you is the route table on the VMXs. They're pretty basic. In host 1, if I do a show route, you can see that I have a default route pointing to the management interface. Most likely this is due to connectivity through the management network. And then I have the 10 networks listed, but I do not have the 200 network. So let's go ahead and create that. We'll just do a set routing options static route, and then we'll just do it to the 200 network that we created. So it's 200.0.13.0, which is the network between the VSRX and the host 3 device. And the next hop is going to be the 10.100.12. Let's go back to the, sorry, it's going to be 10.100.11.1. So that's going to be the network in which host 1 is connected to the VSRX. So to reach the 200 network, I have to first be able to get to that network through VSRX1 through gig E000. So we'll do 11.1 is the next hop. So we'll commit that. And then we'll go to host 2. We'll do the same thing. If we do a show route on host 2, you see that I have the directly connected interface, which is 12.0. So I want to go ahead and put a route in here. It's going to be 200.0.13.0/30. And then the next hop is going to be the VSRX, the directly connected interface, which is 10.100.12.1. Let's go ahead and verify that. So 12.1 is the next hop, as you can see. Okay, so let's go ahead and try the ping. Let's just see what happens by default if I try to ping from host 1 to host 3. So if I go back to host 1, I'm going to do the ping command. So I'm just going to do a ping 200.0.13, and I believe it's .2. Yes, so 13.2 is host 3. And I'll just do a rapid count of 10. You can see that it looks like it's timing out. Now if I go to the firewall, if I do a show security flow session, this is a great command to help us look at live traffic running through the firewall. And this is what we should see is traffic from 11.2, which is host 1, trying to get to 13.2, and that's the ICMP protocol. So it's coming into the VSRX on 000.0, and what we see here is a unidirectional traffic flow. So this is bad. This is one-way traffic, and traffic should be coming back from 002 to 11.2 by default. So this is traffic that is not being NATed. And so what we need to do is create a NAT policy on the firewall so that the traffic is NATed to the interface, the external firewall interface, or the untrust interface. So that traffic is coming in 000 and it's leaving on 002. But if we were to go to host 3 and we look at the route table on host 3, this is the simulated external connection, we're not going to have any private IPs, private IP subnets on this device. We have that quad 0 route, which is built into all of the devices in the vLabs, and that's just for management reachability. But as you can see, I don't have any 10 networks. But what I do have is a directly connected 200 network. So what we're going to simulate with Source NAT, we're going to simulate that the VSRX is going to source NAT this traffic to the 200.0.13.1 IP address. And we're going to do that through security policy under the NAT configuration on the firewall. So again, this is a good way to hide your internal subnets, your private IPs, and your private IP subnets from external devices, from external networks. Okay, so let's go to the firewall and we'll get that security policy created for NAT. So we do that by doing the command set security NAT source. And then I have a bunch of commands that I can use, but I'm just going to do a rule set. And then it's going to ask me to name it. So I'm going to do internal hosts. We'll do internal hosts to untrust. So it's always good to have a good name for your policies so that you know exactly what they're intended to be used for. If I do a question mark, now here's where I put my match conditions. So I'm going to do from source before I do the match conditions, I have to specify, I'm going to specify a rule. You can specify multiple rules within a rule set. So that allows you to create a lot of complex configurations if you need to. In this video, we're just going to keep it to one single rule. So we're going to do from source address Okay, I'm going to back up here. Before we specify the rule, if we do a question mark, you see that I have the from statement. So what we're going to do is apply our security zones. So if I do a question mark, we're going to do from zone, and then the way this traffic is flowing is from our trust zone. So we'll specify trust first, and then we'll put our command here, to zone untrust. So now that we have our zones configured, then we go ahead and put our match on. We will specify our rule set, our rule inside of the rule set. So we'll do rule. We're simply going to name this rule interface NAT. And then we're going to match our traffic. So we'll do a match on the source address of all quad zeros. We'll keep it simple. And then we're going to match on the destination address of all quad zeros as well. And the last condition that needs to be met is our action. So this is going to be a then statement. If I do a question mark, you can see that I have the option to do Source NAT. And we have multiple options in here. We can do off, interface, pool. So we're just going to do interface. So this is the Source NAT interface lab. So that's what we're going to use. So let's do a show pipe compare. And we'll review the policy that we created. So we have a NAT policy, a Source NAT policy. The rule set that we named is internal hosts. So that's going to be host 1 and host 2 to untrust. So we have our zones that we created or that we listed. Those zones were already configured in the lab. That's part of the initial configuration. I'll show you those in a second. So we have from zone trust to zone untrust. Then we have our rule that we created. We said that we can have multiple rules inside of a rule set. So in this rule, we named it interface NAT. And we are matching any source address to any destination. And then our action is going to be to source NAT the interface based on the interface. So we'll go ahead and commit and quit. And if I do a show configuration security, what I'll show you is our zones. We have 000 and 001 in the trust zone, and then we have 002 in the untrust zone. So 002 on the firewall is untrust, and then 000 and 001 is trust. And then we already have policies created for traffic from zone trust to zone untrust. We're just matching all traffic. So if you want to learn how to set up security policies, you can do those. I have those in the earlier vLabs. You can learn all about those in those videos. So now that we have the NAT policy created, let's go ahead back to VMX or host 1, and we'll run that ping again. Okay, so now that you see that the pings are successful, and if I go back to the VSRX, if I do a security flow session, let's go back to the VMX, start the traffic again. We'll go to the VSRX, hit the up arrow, and now you can see that we have some traffic going across the firewall, and it appears to be bidirectional. So what we have is traffic sourced from 11.2, which is the external, the interface on host 1 pointing to the firewall. So traffic coming into the firewall on 000 headed to 13.2, which is host 3. And then we see that traffic being translated and returning to the firewall on 13.1. So before, if we were to scroll up, the security flow that we saw before, the traffic was trying to return to 11.2. It's what we saw on the earlier security flow session. But now what we can see is we see traffic returning to 13.1. So this is a good bidirectional traffic flow. We can see that the NAT policy appears to be working. And there's more commands that we can do to verify the policy. If I do a show security NAT ? And you do the source command, we'll do source rule ? And then you can see the new rule that I created, which is the interface NAT rule. So we'll go ahead and highlight that, drop that in there, and hit enter. And so this brings up a lot of good information. It gives us the zones in which the NAT rule is set up for, the trust to untrust, the match condition, which is any source address to any destination address. The action is, again, this is a source interface NAT rule. And you can see that we have hits on the rule. So again, just to summarize, what's going on here is traffic sourced from host 1 coming into the firewall. It's 11.2. The destination is 13.2. And the translation rule is being hit. And the firewall is looking for traffic from 13.1 returning. The firewall is looking for traffic from 13.2 returning to 13.1. And that's what it's seeing. So in this case, it's a safe assumption that host 3 is receiving traffic with a source IP of 200.0.13.1 and not what it was before we had the SNAT or the source NAT policy of 11.2. So before we had the source NAT policy, that traffic was entering into host 3 into the VMX with the source IP of 11.2, which is in the private IP range, and it does not have a route to that. But once it comes in to host 3 with the snatted IP of 200.0.13.1, it knows how to handle that traffic. It sees it as good traffic and is able to return that traffic. So let's go to host 3. Sorry, we'll go to host 2 and we'll do a ping as well. We'll do ping 200.0.13.2. We'll do a rapid count, this time of 100. That way we'll be able to see our security policy. We should have 120 translation hits. Actually, let's just do 20. 100 is a little overkill. So we should see a double from 20 to 40 on the firewall. So we have success, 20 packets received. Let's go back to the firewall. If I do a security flow session, we don't see it. Let's generate 20 more. So this time we should have 60 on the hit count. Okay, so we see the traffic on the firewall. We see it coming in from 12.2, which if we go back to our network diagram, 12.2 is host 2's interface to the vSRX. We see it destined for 13.2, and then we see the traffic being natted to 13.1. And that's bidirectional traffic. So if we go ahead and look on the SRX, if we look at the NAT, the source rule again, we should have a count of 60, and we do. So that's the end of the lab. If you want to follow along, again, we have the README file, the step-by-step guide on GitHub. You can get the link to the GitHub lab on the description of the video. And this is Juniper vLabs lab number 4. We showed you how to configure a very simple form of network address translation where we are basically taking internal devices in our trust zone and we are performing a NAT from the private IP space that those internal hosts sit in, and we are NATing those to the external or the untrust interface on the firewall, which has a public IP, which is publicly routed throughout the internet. We showed you and did some verification commands on the firewall. So I want to thank you for watching the video, and I hope that you're with me in the next one. Thank you.